wanted to first of all say why I'm doing this video. When I was a little girl, I knew both of my grandmothers, and in fact I lived with one grandmother most of my life, and then my other grandmother lived across town, and I saw her 2 or 3 times a week, and I saw her during the summers. And as I grew up and became a mother and a grandmother myself, I've often thought I would love to have asked her some questions, asked both of them some questions. And by then it was too late to do so. So this video is to answer questions for my grandchildren, and perhaps for their children as well. On my mother's side, my grandmother's name was Una O'Reilly, and she was born in Cherry Creek, Nevada, and grew up in that area. When she was about 18, she went to a St. Patrick's Day dance, and my grandfather, Denver Sylvester Dickerson, was coming through town on his way to California and met her at the party and fell in love with her then. In fact, I have a wonderful letter that he wrote to her, and that's part of your heritage as well, telling her and promising her the moon, really, if she would marry him. He became lieutenant governor in 1908. John Sparks died, and my grandfather became the governor of the state of Nevada. He and my grandmother opened the governor's mansion because it was built around that time. During his governorship, he allowed this fight to come to Nevada. It was the Johnson-Jeffries fight, and it was called the fight of the century because it was the first time that an African-American man and a white man were allowed to fight for the championship of the world. Thousands of people came to Reno in order to see this fight. And this is the whole story of it, and I know you'll be interested in reading about that. My mother was the second child in the family, and her name was Noreen Elizabeth Dickerson. And my parents met in Carson City in the 1st grade. My father said that he loved my mother from then. He said she was beautiful, and she was also very lively, and he fell in love with her then. They married in 1936, and on October 11th, 1938, I was born. And my name was Judith Ellen after my great-grandmother. Now, in those days, there was no television, there were no computers, there certainly were no walking around telephones. We had a big telephone that sat on the table, and when we lifted the receiver, we had to ask the operator to connect us with somebody in town. Later on, we had the dial phones, but we certainly never had a phone we could walk around with. I liked the radio very much. We had radio, and I loved the Cisco Kid and the Lone Ranger. My grandmother and my aunt made me this wonderful dress to be baptized in. I was about maybe 7, and they made it out of their petticoats. In those days, well, not in those days, but days earlier, they had worn long skirts with petticoats underneath. And so they made this dress out of their petticoats. I can still see them sewing on the buttons. And so this dress is very precious to me. My granddaughter, Hannah, wore this dress and had her picture taken in it as well. The end of the war came in 1945, and we moved across town to 239 Cheney Street. My grandmother moved with us. So our house was the house still of all the uncles and aunts and cousins. So it was wonderful in that way. One of the things I remember about growing up too is that my grandmother, my mother, and my father, and all my aunts and uncles were great readers, voracious readers. My father spent a great deal of time at the library and brought home piles of books. Therefore, books have always been important in my life, and I think reading is very important. I was read to, and I read early. We were married April 14th, 1962, in the First Baptist Church here in Reno. I wanted to be married in my little community Baptist church, but my parents had invited so many friends that they couldn't fit in. The very first thing we did as a married couple was buy camping equipment. We had met at camp and we loved camping. So we even put an ad in the paper for used camping equipment, and as soon as we possibly could, we started camping together. About a year later, I was expecting a baby, and we were thrilled. I felt so very beautiful. I thought perhaps no one else in the world had ever had a baby, and I felt I had a wonderful little secret inside of me. I quit teaching because in those days they wouldn't allow you to teach and be expecting a baby, be pregnant. Darren was born February 6th, 1964, and when the doctor held him up, I said, "Have you ever seen such a beautiful baby?" And the doctor smiled and said, "I have seen a lot of babies."